I was already 22 minutes late for the most important pitch of my career, juggling a coffee in one hand, laptop bag swinging wildly on my shoulder, tie half tied and shoes still untied, when I yanked open my front door only to freeze. My driveway was completely blocked. A row of smug, blinding orange cones lined the entrance like a picket fence of passive aggression. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the morning breeze, and standing right at the center, like she was about to cut a ceremonial ribbon, was Karen, the HOA president, sipping from her oversized No. 1 HOA Queen mug. Behind her, two clipboard-wielding minions stood at attention like HOA foot soldiers. My stomach dropped. The street was clear, sunny, and serene except for the blockade keeping me prisoner. I blinked twice, hoping I was hallucinating from stress. I wasn't. Karen took a slow, obnoxious sip, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Road's closed for beautification, Marcus. You'll need to use the side alley. It's policy." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. She smirked, lifted her clipboard, and added, "And just FYI, you're in violation for an unsecured recycle bin lid." Again, I stood there in a button-down shirt, half-tucked, laptop case slipping down my arm, already imagining the chaos at work. This meeting wasn't just any meeting. It was with the CEO of an infrastructure firm we'd been courting for months. If I missed this, I could lose the entire deal. But Karen didn't care. She didn't care that the cones only blocked my house, or that there were no construction workers, no equipment, not even a single shovel in sight. The only thing being beautified here was her power trip. And it wasn't the first time. Over the past year, Karen and the HOA board had targeted me like I was the final boss in their rulebook simulator. I got fined for leaving my porch light on past 10 p.m., cited for aggressive grass height, and once received a written warning for hosting an unauthorized neighborhood conversation. I kid you not, it was me, my next-door neighbor Travis, and his dog talking about football. I'd always played it cool, smiled, paid the ridiculous fines, grumbled to my wife. But this crossed a line, locking someone's driveway unannounced right before a major work commitment for no legitimate reason. That was sabotage. This wasn't about beautification. It was a message. And as I stood there, car keys in hand, laptop now dangling dangerously close to the ground, I realized something. This was war, and not the kind fought with petitions and complaints. No, this was going to be precise, legal, and devastating. Karen sauntered away like she'd won something, her ridiculous mug raised like a victory torch. I used the side alley like a fool, tripped over a trash can, and finally reached the back road where I parked our second car. I drove off with my tie flying through the window and coffee splashing onto the passenger seat. The pitch was a disaster. I arrived sweaty, breathless, and midway through the client's closing remarks. Our project was dropped. My boss tried to be understanding, but I knew I just lost the single biggest opportunity I'd worked on in 2 years. All because of a woman with a mug and a vendetta. That night, I sat at my desk in the garage, staring at the HOA newsletter filled with condescending messages about community harmony and shared responsibilities. I grabbed my laptop, logged into the county land records database, and searched up the street our house sat on. Most people didn't know this, but when I wasn't managing corporate logistics for infrastructure clients, I had a minor obsession with land deeds and zoning loopholes. It started during lockdown as a hobby. Now it was about to become my revenge weapon. Within minutes, I found something strange. The HOA didn't actually own the road. The original developer, a company named Green Valley Holdings, had retained ownership years ago. The HOA only leased it through a renewable private use agreement. And that agreement, it expired 60 days ago. No renewal on record. No purchase finalized. No lien filed. The road was in legal limbo. My heart rate picked up. I refreshed the county page 3 times. Same result. The road was for sale. I didn't call the HOA. I didn't threaten a lawsuit. I called my friend Victor, who worked in commercial land transactions. I told him I wanted to buy a stretch of private road. Victor thought I was joking until I gave him the parcel number. 3 days later, under the name of a holding company I'd quietly registered 6 months prior, the deed was mine. I now owned the very road the HOA had used to block me in. I walked out that morning, coffee in hand, stepped over the same orange cones, and this time it was me who smirked. Karen was adjusting a plastic flamingo in her yard, not knowing she was about to be told on her next drive out. The HOA had no idea their reign over this road had just ended, and I wasn't going to stop at removing cones. No, I was going to install a toll system, cameras, barrier arms, a gate that opened only for those who actually belonged in the neighborhood. And that didn't include her smug little clipboard brigade. It wasn't about the money. It was about principle, about finally putting an end to this power-hungry HOA president who thought she could block driveways like it was a game of Monopoly. By the end of the week, I'd have installed more than just a gate. I'd have transformed this quiet suburban street into the one place Karen couldn't touch, because she'd have to pay me just to pass. And that was just the beginning. The morning after the purchase went through, I stepped outside with my coffee and took in the stretch of pavement that was now legally mine. The irony hit me like a breeze on a crisp spring day. For years, Karen and her clipboard gang had paraded around like they ruled the block, barking citations and snide remarks with the confidence of monarchs. But now, the very ground they strutted across belonged to me. It was still early, and the neighborhood was just beginning to stir. Lawn sprinklers clicked on in unison, dogs barked from behind picket fences, and a jogger in neon shorts zipped past, oblivious to the war brewing beneath the asphalt. I made a mental note to call a contractor about installing the barrier. This needed to be done fast, but it needed to be done right. I spent the next 2 hours finalizing details with a security company that specialized in private lane automation, cameras, motion sensors, license plate readers, a retractable metal barrier, all compliant with the county's regulations for privately owned infrastructure. I wasn't just trying to lock down the road. I wanted this operation to be legal, bulletproof, and unassailable. I was determined to give Karen no loophole to squeeze through. Every technical spec I submitted had references to local municipal code. I even paid for expedited permits and submitted a courtesy notice to residents, everyone except the HOA board members. I knew they'd find out soon enough. By the end of the week, the crew had arrived and begun work. The sound of power tools echoed through the cul-de-sac, prompting curious neighbors to peek through their blinds. One brave soul, Phil from across the street, walked over, coffee mug in hand, and squinted at the machinery. He looked at me with raised eyebrows, unsure whether to be concerned or impressed. I explained what I was doing, and for a moment he looked shocked. Then he broke into a grin. Phil had his own run-ins with the HOA. They once fined him for having off-white shutters during a repaint, even though they matched the builder's color guide. "Good for you," he said, sipping his coffee. About time someone stood up to the gatekeepers. By Monday morning, the system was up. A shiny silver barrier arm stood at the mouth of the street like a proud sentinel. On its side, a digital screen blinked gently to life with a polite message: "Private road, residents only. HOA vehicles must pay toll." There were cameras on both sides and a keypad box for access codes. Each resident received a unique pin through a personal letter I had printed, sealed, and hand-delivered with the help of my wife. It wasn't about turning neighbors into allies. It was about transparency. I made it clear the toll applied only to the HOA board and their vehicles, whose license plates I had documented over the last few months during their many patrols. And as luck would have it, Karen herself drove a brand new Lexus with a vanity plate that read HOA Life. That same morning, Karen rolled up the street, probably expecting her usual routine of inspecting garbage cans and squinting at people's flower beds. As her car approached the barrier, the sensor scanned her plate, blinked red, and refused to lift the arm. She leaned out the window, confused, then irritated, and finally furious, as the display chirped. "Access restricted. Payment required. $3 toll." She slammed her hand on the steering wheel and called someone on her Bluetooth, probably Steve, her loyal vice president, or maybe Frank, the enforcement officer who once tried to write me up for having an American flag displayed on Memorial Day. I stood on my porch pretending to water the shrubs, watching as Karen gestured wildly inside her vehicle. After a minute of rage-fueled shouting at no one in particular, she gave up, put the car in reverse, and peeled away down the side alley, the same route she had forced me to use a week earlier. The poetic symmetry of it all made my morning. The fallout came quickly. That afternoon, a flurry of HOA emails hit my inbox. The subject lines ranged from violation of community trust to illegal obstruction of common property. I ignored them all. Later, Karen herself pounded on my door like she was trying to knock it off its hinges. I opened it casually, like I didn't already have security camera footage of her license plate being denied. "This is outrageous," she bellowed. "You can't just block a road like that. This is HOA jurisdiction." I handed her a copy of the deed. Her eyes darted across the legal language, her mouth opening and closing like a confused goldfish. When she looked up, all the color had drained from her face. "But this has to be a mistake." "We've always had authority over the street," she stammered. "You did," I replied calmly, "until the lease expired. Then the road became available, and now I own it. So unless you want to pay a daily toll, I'd recommend avoiding this stretch of pavement." She sputtered something about lawsuits and community interference, but I shut the door before she could finish. I wasn't being rude. I just had a casserole in the oven. The next few days turned the street into a low-key circus. HOA vehicles, unaware of the change, were stopped cold at the barrier. Some tried calling me, others tried sneaking through behind resident cars, only for the system to catch them and trigger a warning siren. Eventually, I added a new feature. Any vehicle without a code that attempted tailgating would be locked out for 48 hours. A red message would flash. "Unauthorized entry attempt logged. Fine pending." Some neighbors began leaving thank you notes in my mailbox. A few offered to help pay for the system upkeep, though I declined. The toll revenue from the HOA alone was enough to cover the maintenance. The HOA board tried calling a public meeting, but no one showed up. People were enjoying the peace. No more random warnings on their doors. No more patrols snapping pictures of their porches. Even kids on bikes seemed to ride more freely. Karen, of course, wasn't done. I knew her well enough to expect escalation. And sure enough, a few nights later, I noticed a strange utility van parked near the barrier. Two men got out, one holding a wrench and the other carrying what looked like wire cutters. They approached the gate quietly, avoiding the cameras. But what they didn't know was that I had installed motion sensors with infrared alerts. My phone buzzed just as they reached the post. I tapped the feed, saw their faces clearly, and activated the spotlight and speaker. "Step away from the gate," my voice rang out. "This is private property. You are being recorded. Law enforcement has been notified." The men froze, startled. One of them muttered something, and they bolted back to the van. It sped off down the block, tires screeching. I zoomed in on the plates and saved the footage. Sure enough, a reverse image search later linked one of the men to a local fence contractor known for under-the-table jobs. I didn't need confirmation to know who had sent them. Karen had officially declared war, but she didn't realize she was no longer fighting a resident. She was fighting the owner of the road she thought she ruled, and I had just started warming up. The following morning, the smell of burnt coffee and frustration wafted through the air like a fog. Karen had escalated things, and now the HOA board was operating like a cornered animal. I could feel it in the way her eyes darted at me during her neighborhood walks, clipboard clutched tighter than ever. The usual smugness had cracked, replaced with a desperation that clung to her like bad perfume. I could practically hear her grinding her teeth as she passed the toll gate, which now stood taller and more proud than ever. A little animated screen had been added, playing a loop that read, "Welcome residents. Non-residents, please pay and proceed." It even had elevator music. I made sure of that. Despite her failed attempt to sabotage the gate with the Midnight Wrench squad, Karen wasn't backing down. No, she was adapting. A notice appeared on my front door, taped with extra strength adhesive that tore off paint when removed. It read, in bold and wildly exaggerated legalese, that I was in violation of HOA Code 47A, unauthorized commercial infrastructure development. According to their logic, my gate and toll system constituted a business. I laughed so hard I almost dropped my smoothie. They were calling it a gated business zone, like I was setting up a strip mall. I immediately photographed the notice, scanned it, and forwarded it to my attorney, a friend of mine. She specialized in property disputes, and she was already enjoying this saga way more than she should have. Her reply came within the hour. Let them try. This is fun. The next move was textbook Karen. Karen arranged a surprise inspection through her HOA enforcer, a guy named Walt who took himself way too seriously for someone whose job mostly involved measuring grass height and photographing trash bins. Walt marched down the street like he was on a SWAT mission, measuring tape in one hand and foam in the other, leg streaming his approach to the toll gate. As expected, he was denied entry when he tried to tailgate behind a resident's car. The barrier slammed down and triggered the 48-hour lockout. Walt, who apparently didn't read warnings, stepped out and tried to manually lift the arm. It didn't move. He then began shouting into his phone, gesturing wildly. At some point, he tripped over the concrete curb and face-planted in a flower bed. I watched the entire thing from my Ring camera while eating popcorn. That video got passed around the neighborhood faster than a holiday fruitcake. Walt became a meme in less than 24 hours. Someone even photoshopped a cape on him and labeled it Captain HOA, Defender of Overreach. But the real chaos came when Karen filed for an injunction. It was her big play, her final boss move. She wanted a court order forcing me to remove the toll system and relinquish access to the road. Her argument, that I was interfering with community mobility and creating a security risk for essential services. They even dragged in a fire marshal and fabricated some nonsense about emergency vehicle delays. What she didn't know was that I had already coordinated with the local fire department, ambulance dispatch, and police. All emergency services had the override code. In fact, the fire chief himself had stopped by a week earlier, thanked me for the clearly marked lane, and commented that it was a smoother ride than half the county streets. Court day arrived, and I walked into the hearing dressed in a calm gray suit, carrying a folder full of printouts. Karen arrived looking like she was ready to prosecute the Watergate scandal. Her face tightened like a balloon stretched too far, and her stack of documents was at least 3 inches thick, half of which were printed screenshots of my toll gate welcome screen. The judge, a balding man in his 60s with reading glasses halfway down his nose, reviewed everything with the dry patience of someone used to sorting out messy suburban drama. Karen launched into a passionate, rambling tirade about how I had corrupted the spirit of the neighborhood and created a hostile infrastructure zone. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked, "Is that an official term?" She faltered. My attorney calmly presented the deed, the photos of expired lease agreements, and city zoning letters approving the structure. She even played the clip of Walt tumbling into the flowers. The courtroom laughed. Even the judge chuckled. By the end of the hearing, the decision wasn't even close. The judge dismissed the injunction request, stated the road was legally mine, and reprimanded the HOA for wasting court resources. His final statement was a gem. Just because someone plays by the rules better than you doesn't mean they're breaking them. Karen stormed out without a word, leaving Walt to collect her paperwork while glaring daggers at me. I gave him a polite nod on the way out. He tripped again. After the court victory, the mood in the neighborhood changed dramatically. Cars honked cheerfully when they passed my driveway. I started getting thank you notes from people I didn't even know, thanking me for standing up to the HOA. One neighbor left a homemade pie on my porch with a card that said, "Bless you for freeing us." I wasn't a hero. I was just done with the nonsense. But apparently, that was enough to earn me local legend status. Someone even edited the Google Maps listing for our street to say Toll Gate of Freedom. I had it screenshot before the HOA made them change it back. But Karen wasn't finished. Oh no, she was unraveling. And like any good drama queen, her finale had to be loud and poorly thought out. One night, at around 1:30 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I tapped into the gate camera. There she was, Karen, standing in her bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, flashlight in hand, trying to tape over the camera lenses with duct tape. She parked her car in the middle of the lane, hazards blinking. I watched her struggle with the tape, which kept flapping off in the breeze. Then she grabbed something from her pocket. It was a pair of kitchen scissors. She was trying to cut the sensor wires. I hit the audio. "Hi Karen, you're trespassing on private property. Please step away. This is being recorded. Law enforcement has already been notified." She froze. Her shoulders dropped. She looked around like she had just been caught stealing cookies from a church bake sale. Then she turned and waddled back to her car, duct tape trailing behind her like a tail. I saved the footage, emailed it to my attorney, and filed a formal police report the next morning. No charges were filed, but the message was clear. This wasn't just petty drama anymore. This was obsession. The road war had gone from amusing to dangerous, and I was done playing defense. Karen had tried legal games, sabotage, and public humiliation. Now it was time to return the favor, but with style, law, and maybe a tiny bit of spite, the kind that comes with permanent consequences. Because if she thought I'd stop at cameras and a toll gate, she hadn't seen anything yet. The shift in energy across the neighborhood was impossible to ignore. Where there had once been weary glances, awkward small talk, and whispered HOA fears, there was now an undercurrent of relief, of quiet rebellion against a reign that had gone on far too long. Karen's failed attempts to shut down my toll road had backfired so hard they'd practically become legend. I was no longer just the guy with a nice backyard and a questionable tolerance for HOA rules. I had become the unofficial face of suburban justice. It wasn't something I asked for, but when neighbors start bringing you casseroles and offering to mow your lawn out of gratitude, you don't exactly complain. Even Phil, who previously avoided HOA conflict like it was a plague, stopped by and offered to install new lighting around the toll gate. He said it deserved to be seen. I laughed but let him do it. He added motion-triggered path lights and a soft glow LED strip that changed color depending on whether the gate was open or closed. At night, it looked like the entrance to some futuristic fortress, silent, efficient, and off-limits to HOA nonsense. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't coping well. She'd begun walking the neighborhood with what looked like a GoPro strapped to her chest, muttering into it like a reality TV contestant losing her grip. On one occasion, she accused my wife of colluding in the manipulation of civic access. On another, she claimed my dog was a territorial hazard. Baxter, a golden retriever who once fell asleep inside a cardboard box for 3 straight hours, barked at her once from behind our fence and immediately became the focus of a new behavioral violation notice. I didn't even take it down. I framed it and hung it in my garage with a sticky note that said Baxter, Public Menace. But the best part was the sudden silence from the HOA board. Since the court ruling, their once weekly newsletters had gone from fiery ultimatums to vague updates about gardening tips and how to be a respectful neighbor. It was like watching a cult newsletter try to rebrand itself as a lifestyle magazine. They didn't dare mention the toll gate anymore. It had become the Voldemort of our street, feared, unspoken, and utterly out of their control. Still, I wasn't going to settle for silence. I wanted permanence, so I made the toll road official. I registered the road name with the county, renaming it Pinewood Crescent Private Lane. The HOA could no longer claim it as community managed, and I even ordered new street signs to reflect the name. One neighbor offered to host a block party just to unveil the sign. Another suggested shirts. By then, I realized this had grown into something more than petty revenge. This was civic engineering with flair. As a cherry on top, I introduced a new digital feature to the toll system, a dynamic pricing model. Residents were still exempt, of course, but HOA board members had their rates doubled if they attempted to piggyback behind another vehicle. Their plates were flagged and the fine increased. One morning, Karen attempted a sneak-in by riding closely behind a contractor's truck. The gate detected the stunt and slammed shut just in time to stop her. The display screen blinked red and issued a warning. Unauthorized trailing detected. Fee, $25. Please reverse. Karen didn't reverse. She got out of the car and began screaming at the barrier like it had insulted her ancestry. That's when the cameras triggered a new AI-based recording feature I had just activated. It played soothing elevator music and a recorded voice that said, "Please maintain a respectful tone. Your tantrum has been noted." Watching her face turn beet red while classical jazz played softly in the background might have been the highlight of my entire month. News of the toll gate continued to spread. A local blog picked up the story with a headline that read, "Man legally blocks HOA tyrants, charges them to enter their own neighborhood." The comments section was a gold mine of catharsis. People from all over the country were cheering, asking for tips, or begging me to publish a step-by-step guide. Even the mayor's office sent a polite inquiry asking if I'd be open to consulting on traffic management for a different part of the city where another HOA dispute was causing issues. I wasn't about to start a side hustle in petty street warfare, but the idea that this had reached City Hall gave me a certain satisfaction that even coffee couldn't top. The HOA, however, wasn't done embarrassing itself. In one last grasp at relevance, they decided to host a community integrity hearing, inviting every homeowner to attend a town hall-style event at the clubhouse. The plan was clearly to smear me in front of the neighborhood, paint me as a rogue vigilant who turned our peaceful street into a dictatorship. Flyers were taped to mailboxes and slid under doors. I got one too. It had the phrase "unlawful occupation of shared space" underlined 3 times in red. I showed up, front row center, wearing a custom t-shirt that read, "Welcome to my road." The clubhouse was more crowded than it had ever been. Curiosity had brought out even the most reclusive residents. Karen stood at the podium, flanked by Walt and another board member whose name I never learned because he spent most meetings sighing deeply into his clipboard. She launched into her speech, which started shaky and then nosedived into chaos. She accused me of profiteering, of endangering postal workers, even of psychologically destabilizing neighborhood unity. At one point, she pointed directly at me and yelled, "This man thinks he can buy power." That's when Ms. Rivera, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, stood up and calmly said, "Karen, you fined me $90 because my American flag touched a bush. I'll pay triple just to use his road and never hear from you again." The room broke into laughter and applause. More neighbors followed. Someone clapped slow and loud like it was a standing ovation. Someone else brought popcorn. A man in the back yelled, "This is better than Netflix." By the end of the event, it had become a roast of the HOA rather than an indictment of me. Karen left the clubhouse mid-speech, flanked by Walt and his clipboard, leaving behind a room full of people who suddenly realized they didn't need to be afraid anymore. And that was when the real change began. Over the following week, more residents began filing the paperwork to opt out of HOA membership entirely. Some joined together to form a new neighborhood association, one that emphasized community support, not control. The HOA's power began to evaporate, not because of legal action or a hostile takeover, but because no one took them seriously anymore. I stood by the gate one afternoon as a few kids zoomed past on scooters, their laughter echoing down Pinewood Crescent private lane. One of them shouted, "Hey, Mr. Marcus, nice road," and I raised my coffee cup in salute. It wasn't just a toll road anymore. It was a symbol, a middle finger to petty tyranny, a quiet reminder that when you push people too far, sometimes they don't push back. Sometimes they buy the whole road. The peace didn't just return to our neighborhood. It evolved into something better. People started smiling more, talking in their yards again, borrowing tools, sharing food. The atmosphere that had been choked for years by HOA paranoia and passive-aggressive memos was finally breathable. It was like someone had pulled down a curtain that had been blocking the sun. There were no more board members patrolling with cameras, no more warnings about patriotic flags or overly vibrant garden gnomes, no more whispers about someone's garbage can being left out 2 minutes past pickup. It felt like we'd reclaimed something intangible, our dignity. And all it took was a toll gate, a stubborn man with an internet connection, and a clipboard dictator overplaying her hand. But the story wasn't done. Not yet. The final twist came in the form of a desperate move by Karen, who just couldn't let go. Her influence had evaporated, her board members were either resigning or simply ghosting her, and the neighborhood was functioning better without the HOA than it ever did with it. But in true Karen fashion, she had one more trick to play. She filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board, claiming that I had converted a residential zone into a commercial transit system. and that my for-profit blockade was disrupting municipal flow. She included drone footage of the toll gate, pictures of residents driving through, and even a blurry video where she narrated that children are in danger because of this oppressive infrastructure. To anyone else, it would have sounded absurd, but I knew better than to leave it to chance, so I came prepared. I had documented everything from the beginning: the expired lease, the purchase agreement, the legal upgrades, the permit filings, even letters of appreciation from neighbors. I even printed screenshots from our town's official emergency response department confirming their access codes and support for the upgraded road. When the zoning board received the complaint, they scheduled a public hearing, something Karen assumed would be her triumphant return to relevance. It wasn't. On the day of the hearing, I arrived early, calmly dressed, and carrying a tidy folder. Karen came in like a storm, flanked by a nervous-looking man in a suit who I assumed was her newest legal rep. She carried with her a stack of disorganized papers, a manila folder bursting with highlighted screenshots and underlined passages from the HOA's outdated guidelines. The board listened patiently to her tirade, which ranged from claims of neighborhood disruption to the bizarre accusation that I had erected a surveillance state on a residential block. Then it was my turn. I didn't rant. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply laid out the facts, submitted every document in order, and even played a short video of neighborhood kids riding their bikes safely past the gate, followed by Ms. Rivera standing at the keypad, entering her code with a smile. I ended it with a quote from the judge who had already ruled in my favor weeks earlier: "Just because someone plays by the rules better than you doesn't mean they're breaking them." The board voted unanimously against Karen's complaint. Her attorney quietly gathered the scattered papers and escorted her out while she muttered under her breath. It was over, and this time there was no coming back. A few days later, I received a call from someone unexpected. It was a city councilman who had heard about the entire saga from the local press and community chatter. He said the city was interested in exploring public-private partnership ideas for improving neglected roads and wondered if I'd be willing to consult. I laughed, not because I didn't take it seriously, but because the idea that all of this, every absurd twist, every petty fine, every middle-of-the-night sabotage attempt, had led to this moment was something too surreal not to laugh at. I agreed, but on one condition: the pilot program had to include a clause banning HOA interference. He chuckled and said, "I think that can be arranged." Soon after, I made one final update to the toll road system. I renamed the road one last time. Pinewood Crescent Private Lane became Karen Free Lane. I installed a new wooden street sign with a brass plate underneath it that read "Dedicated to the community, free of clipboards since 2025. The neighbors loved it. Some took pictures. One guy brought out a lawn chair and sat beside it with a lemonade for 2 hours, just watching cars roll by and smiling. To mark the occasion, we hosted a block celebration. No permit, no fines, no HOA approval needed, just people coming together. Kids ran through sprinklers. Barbecue smoke filled the air. Someone blasted music from their porch, and nobody complained. Karen's house stayed dark, blinds shut, not a single car coming or going. Word on the street was that she was trying to sell, but nobody in town wanted to buy a house once owned by the neighborhood's most infamous control freak. The real estate listing even tried to describe her home as strategically located near a popular community feature, referring to my toll gate. The irony could have powered the entire block. That night, after everyone left and the street grew quiet again, I stood outside the gate, arms crossed, just listening. Crickets chirped, porch lights flickered, and not a single clipboard-toting patrol disturbed the calm. I looked at the camera feed one last time and saw nothing but calm, content lives going about their evening. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a rebel mastermind. I was just a guy who had finally had enough and decided to fight back, not with noise, but with planning, with patience, and with precision. In the end, I didn't just unblock my driveway. I blocked the HOA's grip on an entire street. I didn't just buy a road. I bought freedom, $3 at a time. And every car that passed through the toll gate, every beep of an access code, was a reminder that some battles aren't won by yelling the loudest. They are won by simply outsmarting the ones who forgot that communities are built on trust, not control. And as the gate slowly lowered one last time that evening, I smiled, not because I'd won, but because for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood finally felt like home.